and welcome. This is Business Edge right here on News Central. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Blaogun. On the show today, we'll take a quick look at how the stock markets across the continent and outside are performing. From there, we get into our headlines and conversation, and we'll wrap things up with NC4 to watch. So right before the headlines, a quick look at how the stock markets both here on the continent and internationally are performing. And a bit of the headlines before we move on. Zimbabwe Senior doctors commence public hospital strike. And Tanzanian government orders $54 million misused funds repayment. We'll get into these two stories right after the break. Welcome. This is Business Edge. And right before we get into the background of our first story, a quick introduction of my guest. I have joining me Muktar Muhammed. He is from Astrodynamic Consulting, the managing director, of course, CEO as well. Muktar, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right. So the background of our very first story, which takes us to Southern Africa. Senior doctors at Zimbabwe's public hospitals have gone on strike to protest against the dismissal of junior colleagues who have boycotted work over pay for nearly 3 months, deepening a crisis in the country's health sector. Zimbabwe is experiencing its worst economic crisis in a decade that has seen resurgent inflation soaring to 3-digit levels, eroding salaries and savings, and reigniting memories of the hyperinflation era of a decade ago. Senior doctors had continued to provide emergency services after their junior colleagues stopped working on September the 3rd to demand higher pay. At least 448 junior doctors have been fired and many more are awaiting disciplinary hearings. The strike by junior and middle-level doctors has paralyzed state hospitals used by Zimbabwe's poor majority. And prior to the strike, hospitals in the country had been struggling with a shortage of drugs and doctors, with many having gone abroad to seek better opportunities. Now, critics say President Emerson Mnangagwa has failed to keep promises he made in last year's election campaign to revive the economy by pushing through reforms, attracting foreign investment, and rebuilding the country's collapsing infrastructure. Muktar, Zimbabwe finds itself right in the cusp of many things. So many people have said that the situation the country is facing right now is reminiscent of about a decade ago when hyperinflation hit triple digits then. And we're seeing a number of factors that seem very reminiscent of that. Yeah. And one of the areas that's being hardest hit is the healthcare sector. So Zimbabwe has not been dedicating a lot of money to healthcare, but this situation is more of a symptom of the economic situation the country finds itself, or is it a separate conversation?
No, it's a symptom about the economic situation the country has found itself because it's a decade of decadency in government, corruption, and lack of building of their infrastructure, which is mostly generally some problem that we encounter in African countries. But the only thing is just that the Zimbabwe government seems not to be handling it well, seems to be doing the normal thing most government do, especially during the military regime, whereby you say, you sack, but they're forgetting that you don't just sack doctors overnight because they are professionals, and you don't just bring somebody to take their position overnight because some of these doctors who are being sacked are trained doctors, are surgeons, they are specialists, consultants, and again, to make matter worse for them, they don't even have the doctors because most of the doctors have found themselves out of the country already because of the economic hardship that they are encountering in the country. And to make matters not even good for them is that just of recent, the vice president of Zimbabwe just came back from
treatment outside in at least 3 countries.
In a country, and he went to China. So, so it's just like you're more concerned about what's happening to the you're not concerned about what's happening to the ordinary citizens of Zimbabwe. So when it's time for them, they can go and get Medicare outside, and that has been the challenge with Africa.
So what exactly is this economic situation the country finds itself? You have about 448 junior doctors demanding higher wages. It's simply something that seems impossible for the Zimbabwean government to give them right now. They're not the only ones. A number of other civil servants have been asking for higher wages to deal with the inflation and to sort of buffer themselves against the rising inflation and costs in the country. So why is Zimbabwe back here? What lessons were not learned from 10 years ago?
You see, economics principles are the same in any part of the world. It has to deal with demand and supply. You must put strong economic policy. You must put policy that will drive growth. You must put real GDP growth, not artificial GDP growth. And you know, Zimbabwe is actually dealing more on tourism. Yeah. That's their area whereby they earn foreign exchange. And most of the tourists don't want to come to Zimbabwe again because of dilapidated infrastructure. Trying to move from one to go to these tourist sites. And all this has happened because of decades of government. And then the government came up with a structure that, okay, now they don't want you to do any medium of exchange using the Zimbabwe dollar. You have to use it electronically.
The RTGS.
So at that point, that didn't work also because, and even with that electronically, you have to restrict it. Exchange system must be a two-way system. I can go in and exit. But you made it a one-way system and you determine how the exit is going to be. It doesn't work like that. Then secondly, of recent, they now decided that, okay, we are going to reissue the dollar denomination to try to curb inflation. That will not work because you are trying to handle the monetary policy, which is something good that you are trying to bring in the currency. But again, you are not looking at the physical policy, which has to do with growth, which has to do with employment, which has to do with infrastructure. Yeah. So there must be a synergy in between those two. So once the synergy is not coming, then you have a problem. And that's why they are where they are, back to where they used to be now.
So we've seen recommendations from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in relation to what the government of President Emerson Mnangagwa can do in relation to the situation. We've seen him try different things. RTGS dollar has come. We've seen the situation last week where they introduced the lower, about 2 weeks ago, where they introduced the lower denomination currency. Even that was limited, and then banks reduced the amount they were able to give. They should be giving out. So there are things that have been tried, but nothing seems to be working. What next for the administration of the president? What do they need to do? Because now his legacy is as tied to the economic crisis, a second wave of the economic crisis, as the legacy of Robert Mugabe was tied to the first situation.
Don't forget that he was also part of Robert Mugabe's government. He was vice president.
He's not a new hand.
He's not a new hand. So, and he has not brought in any new innovation into Zimbabwe. So for Zimbabwe to expect anything new from him could just be a political statement. The challenge is that IMF, World Bank policy have not really worked in Africa because of there's a lot of things that have to do with institutions being built.
And local context.
Local context, and that we need to look at our economy, especially in Africa, begin to look at how we can homegrown economy, because most of these developed economies have structures, have systems, have things that work. But in Africa, it's the man that drives the system, not the system moving on its own. So that is the challenge Zimbabwe is having. They could have the policy, but they don't have the system to drive it. And the man in the affair does not earn the confidence of the civil servant because they've seen him as part of the past administration. So there's nothing different. Only if somebody new has come in that has never been part of the administration, then maybe the story would have been different.
So what should the story now be? Because we're also hearing that the president has announced that the plans that had been put in place to scrap the removal of grain subsidies next year would now be canceled. And this move, the administration says, will protect impoverished citizens from rising food costs. So they're having rising food costs. They're facing a drought that has hit a lot of the southern region of the continent. You're having an economic crisis where you have soaring inflation, shortage of fuel, food, medicines, and electricity. Not to forget that they raised the price of fuel twice in 1 month, just last month. What exactly is the way out for Zimbabwe? And then you continue to have a situation where the economy is expected to shrink by 6.5% this year, and month-on-month inflation at a 4-month high of 38.75%. Where's the ray of light for Zimbabwe?
As it stands now, there's no real life for Zimbabwe. They have to go back to the drawing board and begin to see. And some of those things, it has to come into the pain of doing some of those restructuring. They have to restructure their economy. And when you talk about restructuring the economy, there's a lot of pains that have to go into it. There could be retrenchment of workers. There could be sack of workers. They could have some workers to go. They need to begin to see how they can attract foreign investments. That is the key. And foreign investment will come with their own condition. Will the government be ready to meet some of these conditions that the foreign investors will want to bring in? The key for the investor to get out of what they find themselves now is for them to begin to see how they can get foreign investors to help them stabilize their economy, because they need those currency for the hard currency, the dollar currency for the foreign investors, so that it could begin to reduce the demand and supply in tens of dollars. And unfortunately, most of these things that these people are looking at are basic necessity that they need for their day-to-day life. So the government need to look outwardly. They can't look inwardly, unfortunately, and begin to attract the right type of investment with maybe some little give and take.
A question I hate to ask as we wrap this up: do you think the situation in Zimbabwe is going to get worse?
Well, as it stands now, when you look at all the parameters, look at all the indices, it can only get worse.
Wow.
But you never can tell unless the government decide to do something drastic, which will also have to start from them. Because I mean, the government also should begin to look at.
And that's a secondary question. Is cost of governance also, or cost of government, people like the cabinet and the deputies and the ministers, is that also a factor?
It's a factor. We just told about the vice president that traveled to China for 3 months for medical treatment under taxpayers' money. That is an issue. All
right, we'll continue to keep an eye on the Zimbabwe situation. It is one that many are quite concerned about. It's quite an interesting economy that is in Zimbabwe, but because of a number of political decisions, economic decisions, the country finds itself possibly on the cusp of another economic crash like it was experienced about 10 years ago. Can somehow a miracle happen, some decisive action and steps on the part of the administration? We'll be watching to see how it plays out. You're still watching Business Edge. We'll take a quick break right now. When we come back, Tanzania's government has ordered $54 million of misused funds to be repaid. We'll have the details after this. This is still Business Edge right here on News Central. Now, getting straight into our next story, Tanzanian authorities have ordered officials with cooperative unions to repay $54 million that was released for buying crops from farmers but disappeared through negligence and misappropriation. The country's Minister of Agriculture, Japhet Hasunga, says an audit conducted by the Cooperative Audit and Supervision Corporation in 2018-2019 uncovered the misappropriation of the funds from 4,413 audited agricultural marketing cooperative societies across the country. The acting Director General of the Tanzanian Corruption Bureau, John Mbungo, said officials who swindled the money should start repaying before appropriate measures are taken against them. On October 20th, Tanzanian President John Magufuli announced that the country's anti-corruption watchdog arrested 92 officials with cooperative unions for defrauding cashew nut farmers in the country's southern region to the tune of $522,000. Muktar, when you hear this story, and we've had a conversation about Tanzania earlier this week, they have a number of international lawsuits against them for either breaking contract or the one involving a farmer from South Africa, with judgments ordered against them to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. And then you see what's also happening within Tanzania. It makes you question what exactly is going on.
I think it's a government that lacks direction, a government that seems to play to the gallery. Because when you look at the cashew nut issues that they're talking about, the refunding of this money, these issues happened in 2016 to 2017, the audit that year. And it was the government that released those money to buy some of those cashew nuts from the cashew farmers themselves, which we keep saying is not in the place of government to be involved in business, private business. So why did you have to do that? Because once you bring that, you create room for corruption, because there is no system that monitors this money that you are released, and to whom does it go? You say you gave it to the cooperative. By the time you go to court, the cooperative will defend themselves at the different rate they had to buy.
By that time it gets to the cooperatives, some of that money has been shaved off.
Shaved off. And then, if you are complaining that $54 million have been missing, why are you still repeating the same thing in 2019? Because the government is also saying now the cashew nut farmers also now, instead of purchasing, they have the private investors that want to purchase it at £1, and they are saying no, we won't sell at that price. And the government said, okay, we won't let our cashew nuts go for that price, so we're going to buy it again from you people at $1.43. And now that would a whopping almost $600 million the government will also be putting in there on that project alone. And then the position is saying that it's not because the government really love the cashew farmer. It's because it's trying to score a political point, because that region actually was the opposition stronghold.
So a bit of a populist
move to just gain the minds of the people. But how do you gain the minds of the people? And at the long run, the problem is going to affect the general economy. Like you talk about the lawsuit, you talk about other infrastructure decay that they have in India. You talk about these cashew nut farmers. Do they need infrastructure? They don't need any soft loan. Are you looking at trying to empower them to expand their production? But what you're thinking of is just throwing money at the problem, trying to solve the problem with money, then creating loophole for corruption. And
the issue with that, throwing money at this problem, is that money is never sustainable. You can't keep throwing the money at the problem. So now the head of state in Tanzania said that about 255 million Tanzanian shillings, that's about 110,918 out of the 1.2 billion Tanzanian shillings, has already been recovered from some of the fraudsters and those who were involved in this situation. When he was on a tour of the regions in October, he was told by cashew nut farmers that they were yet to be paid after they had sold the cash crop to cooperative unions since 2016, despite the fact that the government had released money for the buying of the crop. So while we may agree that government should not be in the business of being involved in business, you also have to see that government did not put in place safeguards. You release money and you go and you turn your back and you
release
assume
money
people
to
will act well.
Cooperatives. You release money to cooperatives. We talk about creating a system. If the government does not know how to recover loan.
Yeah, most African governments
no government in the world has the power to recover loan. If you want to really build a strong infrastructure, you want to really build a strong system, you want to recover, then those source money should find their hands into commercial banks. So maybe you give those money to commercial bank, you tell the commercial bank to loan it to the farmers at a certain rate, which will in turn mean the commercial bank have this risk system to monitor this loan and then also get the money back. But what you're doing here, you're throwing money, and at the end of the day, there's always round tipping, because not every cashew farmer will have access to that loan. So you must pay a price to get that loan. And if it is £1, you may be paying like £120. And because the government officials themselves will be involved in one corrupt, shady practice or the other for you to even be involved. So you are paying excess of the government. So what do you expect? So
it becomes inflated overall at the end of the day.
At the end of the day.
So now looking at this, the president is involved now, and he has commended the Bureau for arresting the 92 officials and has said that they need to arrest the rest of those involved. Some of the money has been returned. Is it just returning the money and arrest? Thinking back to the situation here in Nigeria where they've said, voluntarily return stolen funds. Is that justice in this situation?
It's never justice. And again, when you hear arrest, when you hear return, at the end of the day, it will not
balance.
It won't balance. You make mention of the Nigerian case whereby the Minister for Finance was saying a different figure of recovered loan. The EFCC chairman was saying a different figure of recovered loan. That's in a country like Nigeria. Talk less of a country like Zimbabwe. How was this money recovered? What was the system that recovered of this money? Were these people charged to court? Was there a court summon? We've not heard anybody that was taken to court.